Thank you, Jo-Hanna, and I found it hard to tail you off there, but that was a fantastic presentation, and your passion is unmatched. Even though it's PowerPoint now, fantastic presentation, and I think your commitment is unmatched, and just you've brought the whole concept and theory of recovery capital into practice and set it in real terms for us. So now I think it sets up the discussion for Darrell, which I'm going to pass straight across to.
That is great, and it does. Jo-Hanna's going to join us for this panel discussion. First of all, it is superb to be back with you all here today. I don't know about many of you, but it took me quite a bit of time to process our last meeting. I have to say the courage and the insights that the lived experience panels gave us has stuck with me for a long time and indeed still does. Today, the sessions I'll be moderating are not about the lived experience per se, but the expertise is certainly informed by the experience of our panellists. I think what you'll really get a sense of this morning, and Jo-Hanna set it up for us, is that recovery is a process, it's not an event. So there are many, many, many parts to that, and often when I speak to people who've struggled with addiction, they just say the first part of the journey is ending the substance use or reducing it. The really, really hard yards is when you then have to go out and learn how to live again. And I think we'll get a real sense of that this morning. I'm going to be a bit ruthless because I've told my panellists that there are 3 things they must do. They must tell me what works, what doesn't work, and what would be a game changer. So I'm going to be, just to make the best use of that time, just to please just give a warm welcome to Noel Murphy from Soilse, to Nicola Smith, who is an expert by experience, as you will hear, Daniel Jones beside him, who is a recovery coach, and Mick Devine from the Addiction Treatment Centres of Ireland. You're all very welcome to the Assembly. Noel North, we'd say Soilse, but it's Soilse. Let's begin with you because Soilse, what it does, it's even preparing people for the recovery journey. It's not just a question about putting people in detox. Can you talk us through what your process is and what is it about it that works? Because contrary perhaps, and I know those figures are really tough, but there are successful outcomes.
Yeah, we have very successful outcomes, and the first thing I would concur with everything what Jo-Hanna said there. That's like we practice what Jo-Hanna spoke about there on the ground. So we are a recovery-orientated system of care. Soilse is up and running now 30 years, and through that 30 years, we've developed a model of care where we have developed a very efficient continuum of care, where people come in who need to get off drugs. We have a detox preparation program. From there, then they spend about 3 months getting ready to detox. Now, not everyone needs to detox. The difference now with drugs is a lot of people come in and they actually don't need detox, they're on drugs like coke. So it's just getting them ready to go into treatment. Then they go directly from our day program to an inpatient treatment centre to either detox or for therapeutic treatment. They spend 4 to 8 weeks there, and then they come back to our drug-free day program. So it's very the whole role is that we have a partnership with the CDETB. And a lot of what we do is educational focused. So a lot of people who come through Soilse have very little recovery capital. And the difference, I suppose, what Jo-Hanna was saying is that if someone comes in with a lot of recovery capital, the work is fairly easy. It's a lot of sort of just they drive their own car.
So when you say that, if they have a house, if they have maybe they're holding a job or they've access at least to resources, maybe money, it's a different type of capital than someone else.
Completely different. So then someone who come in who have no recovery capital, so they probably have a family history of addiction, they might be a street user, homeless, they're in and out of the criminal justice system, a lot of time in prison. So what we're doing there then is it takes a lot more time, it takes a lot more, you're building recovery capital with them. So the goal then is to try and have them in every day, get them, like literally some of it is that some people come in and they have very low literacy levels. So it's a completely different way of working. And them groups are mixed as well. So usually then with our partnership with the CDETB, if they complete the program, then they'll go into a college course, a pre-college course, and then they'll go on, hopefully they'll go on. I mean, we had a graduation there 2 weeks ago. We have groups of 12 people. We have 3 groups of 12 drug-free groups and a detox group of 12 as well. But in the last group that graduated, we had 10 people who graduated drug-free. And then within that then we had 3 people who had come back who just got degrees, 1 person who got a master's and 1 person who was going forward for a PhD. So there is really excellent outcomes, but it's very difficult to get the person from A to C, A to B. Yeah. Like it's a lot of process. The thing that would happen in there is that when people come in to recovery, they're ambivalent. So it's not, people are not coming in and they're like, I want to get drug free. It's always, I want to get drug free, and it's usually unconscious ambivalence. So I want to get drug free, but I love drugs. I don't like the consequence of drugs, but I like how they make me feel. So it's never simple of you come in and you charge through and it's great. There's loads of ups and downs. Dealing with, like, say, I sort of describe it as a table with 3 chairs. Or three legs, sorry. So it's like people with recovery capital, and lots of recovery capital they're on a steady table. But someone who has very little recovery capital, it's 3 legs on it, and if a forced life stressor comes on, the table falls over. So we're always sort of trying to keep an eye on that, and relapse is a big part of recovery as well. And people have to sort of realise that people will relapse. Unfortunately, we have what we call a recovery wall in Soilse, and a lot of people put their name on it. And over the I'm working there I've worked there for 15 years. I moved out for 7 years, and I worked throughout the rest of the system. And then I come back there about 6 weeks ago. And on the wall that we have, I was looking at the names of it, and there's a lot of names that are dead. So unfortunately, in addiction, people don't recover. Some people die. But I think the way forward for us and to get the most successful outcomes is through recovery. And a big part of that then is the whole system of NA, AA, CA, GA. That's all a big part of it.
Isn't it, Nicola, the extent of what is required for recovery? Like, I mean, the Assembly has heard a lot about the difficulties of dual diagnosis and people falling, between stools, but you have a powerful lived experience of coming through that. So what worked for you, and as someone who has been through that experience, what worked for you that got you out to the other side, that looking back now you think, okay, that's what really, really helped?
Well, I had my experience of going into treatment with a very little support, coming from a clinic. I was on a clinic on methadone for 12 years. Back then, from what I've heard, there's not a lot of change in that area. There was no care plan.
Afterwards?
No, there was no care plan from the time I entered the clinic. You would have seen doctors and you would have got health kind of concerns. They would have looked at some of that. There was never a kind of, how long do you want to be here? I didn't want to be there for the rest of my life. I had 2 children. I was looking for help around my addiction. I also believe what Noel was saying, I couldn't imagine my life without it either, because of what it done for me. At the time I didn't know I had PTSD. It was years later I got diagnosed with that. So it was doing something for me that nothing else was doing. But at the same time I didn't understand any of that. So there was no process of, right, you're here now, do you want to be here a year? What can we put in place? What structures can we bring in? You were just there, you showed up every day for your methadone, and they dealt with all the kind of ups and downs within that.
And something, Nicola, that Jim was saying yesterday, and we heard a lot about the specific care and support paths for women, that there are different needs for women and men. Yeah. And was that something you felt was that maybe wasn't there?
Oh, 100%. There's a huge stigma for, I think, a mother. I think even biasm, even in your own family, without them even knowing, there's just, how can you be doing this in front of your children? There's just a lack of understanding all around addiction, without people even realising that they are judging, But yeah, definitely.
So what worked for you? What got you across the line?
I haven't seen Noel in 10 years. He was my first counsellor that I ever experienced. I was like, geez, this is a coincidence. He was the first service, a social worker actually, that came into Trinity Court, and she was there for 6 months. And she asked me one day, she said, Nicola, how are you? I said, I don't want to be here anymore. I said, I don't want to bring my children into this place anymore. And when I meant I don't want to be here, I don't want to be here. And and I was frightened. My mental state was getting progressively worse. And she kind of went for bat in the team meetings and said, I believe she can do it, I believe she can get off here. And so that took 2 years, and then I was introduced to Soilse, the stabilisation programme. So that was my first kind of introduction to, and I was up and down, and I was trying to stay in and I'd go again. But it was my first introduction to kind of, give, you know, the wanting to give a clean urine, and you know, really wanting to, and seeing other people that were doing it. That was a big, that plants the seeds.
And I suppose that level of peer support and seeing that others can do it. Daniel, can I speak to you, because you're a recovery coach, and it's something that you get paid to help other people do it, and it is a life that you have by experience. But you spent a lot of the big landmarks of your life, the 18th, the 21st, other things, in a place where most of us would never imagine. Can you just talk us through your experience?
Yeah, well, my experience would have been from a very young age. Would have been in and out prisons and institutions for most of my life till I was 34, I suppose. So I was in and out of clinics and methadone clinics and doctors and stuff like that. And nobody ever told me that there was another way. Nobody ever put a recovery map in front of me. From 16, I was put on a methadone program. Nobody ever says, why don't you try this? Why don't you try that? There's a better way to live. Like, you know what I mean? So I was on that wheel for over 20 years, and I used to always have this great big plan. When I get out, I'm gonna do it different this time. I'm gonna get my life together, and I'm gonna try live, and I'm gonna try have a family. And I always wanted to do what the normal person was doing on the street. But within 6 months, 3 months, I'd end up back in there, and I'd always wonder, how was this after happening? And I didn't know where I was going wrong. And I suppose when I think back, like, I never had support. There was no support. So I didn't know anything about recovery. The way I was living was the only way I knew how to live at the time. I suppose till the end of me using days, when I became really willing, and I was suffering with my mental health. I was suffering with paranoia. I was suffering with depression. I was suffering with all that sort of stuff, and I didn't want to live that way anymore, I suppose. And I became willing to try something new.
So what were the keys that unlocked then that for you, that got you to the position now where you're actually able to go out and help other people who had your experience?
For me, the keys were somebody done what I'm doing now for me at the end. I had lost 3 of my family members to addiction, and I didn't want to die myself. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, I was introduced to Soilse as well, and I went into Soilse and I hadn't got a clue, and I suppose I needed to learn how to live again. I needed to learn. I had no tools to be able to live a normal life, and when I went into Soilse, they started to believe in me. They started to give me hope. They started to put a map out in front of me that there was different ways. They discovered that I was dyslexic. They gave me support around education.
But you began your education after that?
I began my education in Soilse. I never had education before. I never really went to school. I never done any exams or junior cert or anything like that. So when I went to Soilse, that's where my education journey began. And yeah, I went into sports coaching, and I went into the fitness, and that's what really worked for me for my recovery as well. And while I was doing that, I got an opportunity to be a recovery coach, and I went to DCU, and I studied there for part-time for a year, and it just gave me tools that I never had before. It gave me it gave me a lot of confidence. It gave me hope to be able to help somebody else. Like, I seen that what I had was, I had been there. I'd been to the prisons, I'd been to the hospitals, I'd been to all the places, and if I could do it, so I could definitely help somebody else do it. Like,
yeah, Mick, you know, it's brilliant to hear about, you know, such the grassroots approach, but when we're talking about the health-led approach and that aspect of recovery, it is multifaceted. But what, in your view, are we getting right, and where are we falling down?
What are we getting right? I represent a group of residential treatment services, and I think there's definitely a part to play in recovery for residential services. We get people into the safety of a treatment environment for a period of time where there's a good chance there won't be drug use, safe and stable detoxification, a chance to learn about the dynamics of the addiction. A lot of people, when they're in the throes of addiction, don't understand the dynamics that are in operation, and that when someone starts craving drug use, it's often beyond a matter of choice. And so for people to experience the cravings without resource to drug use and finding other ways of seeing a craving through and realizing that they can is a good kind of footing to get people off on the road to recovery. So that's one thing we get right, is about educating people about addiction and its dynamics, and that when you're in the throes of it, you're actually cooperating with the dynamics, and you need to learn to manage the dynamics in a different way for recovery to be sustained and ongoing.
It was interesting listening to Nuno yesterday when he was talking about how confirming a lot of the things about the Portuguese model, dispelling a lot of the myths perhaps about it too, but talking about how decriminalisation wasn't the biggest part of that. It was actually having the structures and the accessibility of services. So is that something where there is a gap where, as Jo-Hanna and others have outlined, it was a grassroots sort of community-led model that sort of brought the state along in many respects?
Well, I don't know if this is answering your question, but once people get to feel the safety and start to realize there's skills needed to be in recovery, and residential treatment providers are well placed to help people develop skills for recovery. For instance, we do workshops, psychoeducation workshops. We did a workshop one day on problem solving. And so we got a consensus among the group as to what was the biggest problem this group was contending with at that time. And we agreed the biggest problem the group had was they go into a room and there's other people in there. And that is a very challenging prospect for a lot of people. And sometimes people can't stay in the room. They don't feel they have the wherewithal to be able to manage in a room and have a conversation. So if you're talking about fellowship groups, or if you're talking about aftercare groups, or other support groups, it takes a lot of wherewithal, it takes a lot of skill for people to be able to make use of recovery kind of groups. So a big part of residential treatment is to help people just make contact with other people and start developing skills for recovery. So with the residential setting, people are together 24 hours a day and 7 days a week, and it's a drug-free environment. So people have to learn.
But then when they leave,
they
have
leave.
to learn.
That's right.
They have to learn to give again. And Jo-Hanna, can I just bring you in on that, because I think what the panel are speaking to when we talk about a holistic approach, that's really where the sort of whole of government, whole of the totality of what people need to, I suppose, to even to try and reduce those high levels of relapse. If they don't have access to all of those services, it makes it really, really challenging.
It makes it challenging, and in a way it's a waste of time, it's a waste of resource. To answer your other question, what we're doing really well is treatment. What we're doing somewhat better is recovery when we're resourced. What we're not doing great is a whole recovery approach.
Yeah, and as you say, look, with all of the benefits, including the socioeconomic ones. I would just want to ask each one of you, obviously this is such a multifaceted issue, there are so many issues at play, but what do you think would be, if you had a magic wand, or if you're in control of government for a day or whatever it is, you've got an idea or set of ideas that could really be the game changer? Daniel, you're working with people day in, day out. If there was sort of a sense of a game changer, or what would really, really, really help, what do you think it would be?
We think more peer support in the likes of methadone clinics, and I think for recovery to be made more visible, for recovery to be, we know harm reduction and all is great, and everyone's journey to recovery is different, but I think recovery should be promoted a lot more, should be made visible, a lot more visible. There should be more recovery, everything, I think. Yeah, and I think to be able to, for somebody who has lived experience to be able to help somebody else is powerful, because we have been in the hole and we know there's a way out of it.
Yeah. And Noel, obviously, and both Nicola and Daniel have spoken to the power of it, but obviously that peer support is key. So for us to capitalise on the good stuff that we have there, what do you think is really going to bring it forward in terms of building that recovery capital? Is it peer support? Are there any specific initiatives that you would like to see introduced? Because it's not, as Jo-Hanna said, often it's about funding, but it's not always just funding per se.
Yeah, well, the Recovery Academy Ireland is actually based in Soilse as well. They've only recently moved in. When I went in,
You're developing a campus, aren't you?
Yeah, well, we're developing a recovery campus in Soilse. The ATCI has been very supportive, and the Minister has been very supportive of this, and they've bought the buildings all in the same area. So we now, hopefully within the next 2 years, we finish one phase of it. The next 2 years we'll have a whole recovery campus, and part of that will be is that when you go in this gate, there'll be a recovery cafe there. We'll have the Soilse programs. We'll have AA, NA, GA. We'll have a whole environment where when people don't want to drink or take drugs, they can go in there, they can get their care, and they can also socialise as well. But just to go back to your other point is that with the Recovery Academy of Ireland, we have 15 coaches coming on in the next phase, which is in the next 2 or 3 weeks, and we've 14 in reserve. So that's 29 people in recovery. When they finish that, then what they'll do is they'll go out into different programs, and they'll then be recovery coaches in that program. Now, what Daniel was saying about the point he was making about the methadone clinics, I mean, I was working in methadone clinics for the last 5 or 6 years, and it took a lot of hard work just even to get case managers into clinics. And we did eventually get them into 4 clinics. And that means now that, and a lot of them case managers would be probably in recovery themselves. So we tried to focus on that, get people in with the lived experience. When you send someone out, what you have is a recovery champion. And they go back into their community. And these would have been in their community known as drug users. They go back in drug-free then. They then become a role model. And that has a huge contagious impact. And that's why in Soilse we say recovery is contagious, because it is. The more people you get into recovery, the more people that will attach onto it and follow that role. But it's a difficult process, and it's a lot of work to get people in recovery, and then to keep them in recovery is difficult. But the point Jo-Hanna made about after 5 years, if we can get them to 5 years, that's the key part. They sort of just take off then. Now we have people coming back all the time. The process, what we do in Soilse is we get people back for the graduation. So people that were 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. I mean, at that conference that Jo-Hanna did the other day on Thursday in Trinity College, we had someone there that was 20 years and someone there that was 12 years that had gone through Soilse and were in their community, giving back. I just want to make one more point if I can, is that if someone comes in active addiction and they're in active addiction and they're flat out going to prison, committing crimes, they're literally costing the state a huge amount of money. You get that person into recovery. Recovery is not just about stopping taking drugs, it's a complete switch in your life. So you don't do crime anymore. You become a community member, you get involved in sport, you give back. And that, for me, is what recovery is about. It's not just about stopping taking drugs, it's a whole process. And
it's the whole point that Nicola has made about stabilisation is only the first part, learning to live again. For you, what would be, what would really help? What would you want the Assembly members to kind of take away from today if there was something that they could help frame their recommendations? What do you think would be a game changer for people who've been through your experience?
I think there has to be, in our communities, I think it's great, there's a lot of services in town. Throw a stone and you can hit a service, you know. But if you go out into the communities, we have a lot of young people now starting off in the cocaine epidemic. I think there has to be that kind of stabilisation within our communities, treatments, if it's available to that part, if they need it, and then a year and a half day programme you know, that's there for them. You know, your education is gone. How do you settle back into your family life? Probably one of the hardest things you'll ever have to do, with kind of all the stuff that was dealt with. Children, how do you become a parent again? Do you know, how do you face teachers and schools, and you know, these are all the things that you need support in. I think if you put that foundation there, it's like a measuring tape then.
Yeah.
You start seeing your life change and see it. Even when you hit a bad place or you hit pitfalls, you can go, okay, what are the tools I need to do? Get in contact with the key worker, go on with, this is going on. Or go in and have a cup of tea. And an open door policy for people who have left, and they can come in and have a cup of tea and have a chat. That place is there for them. Our doctors in our communities don't even recommend any services.
And thank you for that, Nicola. But Mick, that's really at the personal. What needs to happen at, I suppose, the political with a small p or big P, whatever your level, because actually it comes around to what Nuno was describing yesterday, the governance, the structures, the accessibility. So there could be pockets of the country where maybe Dublin, where you could throw a stone and hit a service, but there are other parts of the country which would struggle to do that, and possibly people are struggling and possibly losing lives because they can't access that treatment.
Yes. Yes, well, I liked the emphasis yesterday on biopsychosocial approaches and that there needs to be a whole person approach. And so it's not just a treatment intervention, it's the follow through that happens after that, so that people have opportunities to make meaningful contributions to society. That can't be done without stable accommodation. It can't be done without access to training and education and employability. And just as Nicola's saying about for people to be parents again, and so there's a whole range of learning that needs to happen in psychological approaches, and the whole trauma-informed approach to care is very important too, because the debilitating effects of trauma last a long time, and there needs to be a part of the intervention that is addressing developmental traumas and PTSDs as well, so in an ongoing kind of way.
We're going to do something slightly different. We're going to go straight to the Q&As, so get your little questions ready. But before I do, Jo-Hanna, I just want to ask you, as a business journalist, I'm very interested in that concept of recovery capital, both at a personal perspective, but also just the fact that if we invest in this, I mean, there are huge costs to the state of not supporting people in recovery because of the knock-on impacts on services. So can you just speak to us just before we go to the tables just about that recovery capital, about not just the person and their recovery, but also the broader societal benefits for when we do invest and do support that well?
Well, the immediate thing is the relief of burden off the health system and the costs that go with that. But I suppose it's to loop back to what Noel said. You know, recovery doesn't happen in isolation. People are part of a family, they're part of a community, and they're part of society. And so as well as not costing the state something, they become taxpayers. They give back to community, they engage in civic engagement, societal benefits. So the capital that we talk about at the individual level for a person in recovery can be extended to community and society. So, I mean, as I said earlier, and not to be crude about it, even if you don't care about recovery, financially recovery makes sense. We have the economical studies that look at whether we build a therapeutic community in a prison and give people an access out rather than just putting them in prison and giving them no support, that kind of pays dividends. So the Americans have done this for the last 2 decades. For every dollar spent, you'll get, you know, at least double that back, if not 3 times, 4 times the amount. So economically it makes sense, but the capital that we talked about is extended, as I say, to family, community and society. Recovery makes a whole load of sense.
Brilliant. We are we're going to take a couple of questions for the panel. So we might just do the same as we did yesterday, just in terms of maybe taking it in groups of 2 or 3, but and I've warned them that your questions are always very, very interesting. So I was just wondering if we have the mic, so if there are any hands up, maybe just to maybe give 1 or 2 questions to our panel in terms of support and recovery from addiction. And I've got table 9 and table 2. We'll start with those.
Hi, good morning. Thanks very much for a very interesting discussion. One of the things that every time I hear people talking about the solutions is trying to understand what's broken, what is not working. So it all makes sense. All of the stuff you've spoken about this morning makes perfect sense. what needs to change to make that happen? Is that a change in structures? Is it a change in organisation? Is it a change in budgeting? Exactly what is wrong is my question. I don't understand. It seems everyone knows what needs to be done, so why is it not being done?
Okay, that's great. And then we'll just take this question from table 2 as well. Thank you.
Hello guys, good morning and thank you very much for being with us. What is the beginning of a journey towards sustained recovery level for those who are homeless with non-recovery capital? Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very, very much. I might maybe just, Noel, go to you first on that, because as we discussed at the outset, recovery capital can mean different things depending on where you are in life, but particularly for the homeless who are the most vulnerable, and many of those who are going into treatment, either, I think Jo-Hanna said, either at the point of going into treatment or certainly maybe after it, homelessness is a huge issue for them.
Okay, so I mean, in our detox prep program at the moment, we would have a lot of people that you're talking about there. So majority would be that person you're talking about. So they're homeless, they're in and out of prison, they're crack users, street drug users, lots of trauma, what Mick was saying earlier on, lots of trauma in their lives throughout. So it takes, there's a phenomenon called equifinality. And in that what that means is that if you put somebody in the right environment, with the right nutrients, with the right care, with the right attention, all of the right stuff is there, they will grow. And that's what we try and do. We try, now it's not airy-fairy type of stuff, it's not that, it's very pragmatic, it's very, look, you are where you are, you're responsible now, you've got to make the right decisions now, but we help them step by step all the way through, and it's very slow. And everything is around setting goals, small goals, every goal is that we set, we move it forward. And it might be that will, one person will come in, it might take 6 months before they're ready to go to detox. And they're still on drugs at this stage, but it's a slow process. And then it might be that they go away and come back. Eventually then, when they do go into detox, then when they get drug free, then they're left with all the emotional stuff then. The stuff that they've been self-medicating for years. So then it's into a place where Mick's, where you'd be talking about therapy at the treatment centre, they'll do their time there, and then they're still very early in recovery. And then it's back to our day program, and it's another 18 weeks there. Same thing, then it's an aftercare program after that. And slowly but surely then you see people, and we see all the time, people come back 4 or 5 years later, they have a degree. And that was the same person that was there 4 or 5 years ago. That is the person you're talking about there. So it's a tried and tested process, and it's like what Jo-Hanna is saying, it is very much that we know what we're doing and we know what works, and it's just trying to make sure that the person, but it's addiction, you know, something can always happen along the way. So it is trying to put in the right supports all along the way, but it is a process that, you know, you just have to sort of be very patient with the person and walk with them all the way through, you know.
But Jo-Hanna, it's very, very difficult when you don't have a roof over your head and when you have uncertainty about that, and obviously we're not immune to the wider housing and homelessness crisis that's in society in general, but for these particularly vulnerable people, not even having that, it's just a huge part of your recovery capital that's missing.
Yeah, and I suppose it's to look at it from the perspective that housing is the immediate issue, because, you know, it's very difficult, as Noel says, to sustain recovery, but to sustain recovery while you're in a homeless agency with no house and no clear end in sight is really difficult. But then we have to go behind that and know, well, what do we know about people who are homeless? Well, we know that they have complex needs. They're more likely to, you know, have, more likely to have co-occurring mental illness. They're more likely to have left school early. So that level of capital just is compounded all the time. So I suppose the immediate thing is to look at the house, but ultimately, again, to bring it back to the point of this systemic capital, we really need for those agencies to be ponying up with their strategic plans and feeding into things that we know that the person's going to meet that block anyway. It's just, there was an analogy used yesterday about this patchwork quilt, But if we keep on going where we've been, we'll still be here in 2 decades, you know.
And Mick, we heard it, the Assembly heard it at the last session that we had where the frontline workers were talking about how challenging it is for people to access services. When you have some capital, it's even more so, and the stress they go under trying to get housing for people or trying to do that, and especially when the gang's very complex, because some treatment centres don't accept you if there's X or Y, and it gets complicated, but that fundamental need for housing, if you're homeless, it just must be...
See, there has to be a multiple response. You know, we have stories of people being passed from one service to the other because we can't do anything until you've addressed that area. And we have to be good at presenting a variety of solutions at the same time. So there's treatment and housing and training and educational opportunities, all being presented at the same time. The other question seems to be getting at the problem of stigma, that the drug-using community are stigmatized, and their families, and even some communities are stigmatized. And that means they're very low down the priority list, and they're easy to exclude, and there aren't any votes. So we need to destigmatize the problem, we need to prioritize the problem, and just as Jo-Hanna is saying, we need a multitude, we need a multidisciplinary response to the problem of
So Dan, just go to the question from Table 9 then, because you're working day in, day out with people. What's not working? What is not working? You know, if there are a multiplicity of services, is it just that it's not all joined up? Is that what's lacking?
We think there should be a lot more communication within services. Services should communicate a lot better with each other. I think we often had people ready to go to treatment, and there was just more hoops put up in front of them and they couldn't get through them. And unfortunately, some of them went back using because there was too many barriers put up. I don't think that's what I personally think wasn't working for me at the time, or for them,
So that they were there, but they just weren't all connected. For you, Nicola, what's not working?
I think there's a lot of money being, I don't know, look, you can't put a price on people's lives, can you? But there's a lot of money, it seems. Well, we could all say, can't we, that the being left on methadone for 15, 20 years and that not being available, you know, that keeping you stuck. As Jo-Hanna said, when does recovery start? Maybe recovery starts the day you walk in there to go on a methadone program for that person. I want off the street, I want off this drug. Maybe it starts then. Do you know, why are we pumping so much money into keeping people stuck and not in a process of recovery? I don't know, I think as well, I mean, services, I think from the hierarchy, you need to look at what doesn't work and what actually does work and what's proved to be working. We know that stabilisation works, treatment works, and aftercare in long term. Not aftercare for necessarily can work for some people an hour a week, but we know that kind of bridge back to normal living, if you have that stability every day for a while, works.
So is it, Noel, then, given the success that you've outlined, then what is it that's going wrong? Is it funding? Is it governance? Is it structures? Is it lack of what Jo-Hanna was describing as that sort of overall political whole of government or whole of service? You know, if there is so much being done on the ground, what is it that's...
Well, there is in the continuum of care, what you were talking about there, in the continuum of care, if we get someone into detox and they're homeless, well, when they come out and finish their detox, we have a collaboration with some of the agencies. They'll go into a drug-free house. We're not going to send them back to a hostel where they're actively using drugs. So that system is in place, and like it is possible. Probably where it is lacking is when we're stabilising someone. When the housing force come in, we used to, at that point, we had a load of hostels that were drug-free hostels and a load of hostels that were stable hostels. That all went. We lost them all overnight. Probably where it is lacking is having a hostel or places where people who are stabilising and getting ready to go to the next phase. That's probably where we're lacking. We do have plenty of drug-free houses. McFerry's would have a lot of them, where when we get someone in for a detox, we have a recovery house is what they're called, and there'll be 4 or 5 or 10 people in that house all in recovery to get drug checked out as well. So that system is in place. I'd more go for the other part of it, you know.
And of course, it's where there are gaps. The gaps can be really costly for the individual and for everyone. We'll take a couple more questions. I know I've got 1, 2 and 3. I've actually got 4, so I'm going to take them all together. So I can't see all the table numbers. I'm going to start at table 10 and then we'll go just around. So we'll go 10, 14 and 12. So we'll just start with the lady from 10.
Hi, I'm just wondering why people are put on methadone with no time limit and review, and why there's no timely transition to get to a place of recovery via the likes of naltrexone. Is it too expensive, or is there a monetary interest for GPs prescribing methadone and not taking people off it?
Okay, I think most GPs would like to see most of their patients off that. Let me just go to 14, is it? We'll take that. So,
Sorry, thank you. I'm
take the mic.
surprised that more work is not being done in the prisons. Some years ago, John Lonergan, who was the head of Mountjoy, claimed that 70 to 90% of his inmates had drug and mental health issues, and that was the basis of their reason for being in prison. So I would, with the cost of it as well, and where you have, people in-house, I would have thought that is a bit of a lost opportunity. I think yesterday somebody gave a figure of 6% treatment or something for prisoners. I mightn't be accurate on that, but I just feel, is it a lost opportunity?
Okay, that's great. So prisons, and then I think there was a question or two here. Is it at table 12? Thank you.
Hi, thank you all. I understand the need for housing and for stability for someone to come out of to recover and allow them to fully recover. But I'm just wondering, given that in Ireland at the minute, a young couple working 2 jobs can't actually buy a house, where are we going to get the money from to have those housing? Is it from increased taxes? Is it from less spending on our judicial system? Realistically, to our panel, where is that going to come from?
Oh my goodness, lots of easy questions this morning. Let's just see. So we were looking.
Sorry, I have a question too, and I'm from table 12 as well. So just 1 minute. And I wouldn't take very long. I was really encouraged by the story of Daniel, and it seems like we really have a strong recovery community. And is that still the majority case, that we have the strong community, that we have the recovered patients that have helping the existing patients? And if this is the case, that what is the biggest challenge of reintegrating to the majority community and to access the health education and finding a job, and how much part does the discrimination and unconscious discrimination play? And as Mike said, that there is a stigma that when someone recovered and when they try to access the public service, they try to find a job, would the drug treatment history treated as the medical data, as a part of personal privacy that's protected by the GDPR, and the people, most public people, shouldn't have the access, maybe just shouldn't have access.
Okay, there is a lot. Thank you very, very much. There's a lot to unpack there. I did tell you, didn't I? They come at you with their questions. There's a lot there, so I might have to divvy this up just a little bit. Jo-Hanna, you had already made the point, I think, in your presentation about when you're talking about where investment needs to begin, and one of the key places, obviously, is in our prisons.
Yeah.
That could be, and Daniel spoke about it also, that perhaps that is one of the key intervention points that could put people on the path to recovery earlier. And in fact, when we heard from the lived experience panel, a lot of them said their journey to recovery began there.
Absolutely, and I think that, again, it's about that redirection of how we spend monies in prisons and turning the lens towards recovery. And if Justice did have recovery in their policy, that would be, a way to address that. And again, we have several evidence-based programs internationally that we know work in prisons to get people towards a recovery journey.
Yeah. Noel, can you speak to us about the complexity of the recovery journey and why someone would be, as many are, not all, on methadone for sustained periods of time, and is there a way, and Nicola talked about it, of disrupting that longevity?
So I did work in methadone clinics for a good few years, only operations, but I dealt with a lot of service users as well. It's very complex, and that's the problem. It is very complex. Not everyone wants to come off drugs. You have to realise that as well. Some people actually want to stay on drugs. So that's a percentage of people. Some people are not ready to come off drugs because if they do, they'll just go back using. Some people do want to come off drugs, but they struggle with their doctor or their nurse or whoever it is, and they don't seem to hear them. So there's a variety of reasons why people don't come off drugs. And usually, I know in a lot of the clinics on the north side that I worked in, there was no case management. There is now in 4 of them, but there's still not in others. So, and case management, what that means, there's no care planning. So a lot of people in clinics don't actually have a care plan. They do now in some of them, but to have a care plan makes a huge difference. It means then you're meeting someone every 4 to 6 weeks. You're sitting down with them. You're going through what you want, what you need, because what you want and what you need to do to get there is completely different. So some people might want to get drug free, but they're still smoking crack. So there's a lot. It's so complex and so sort of that.
And Daniel, it is, isn't it, really, really complicated? And perhaps for people who have not been affected by that, maybe don't understand the complex dynamics of that. But you were on methadone from a very, very young age, and it was obviously something, looking back, that you questioned. Why were you on it for so long? But I suppose everybody's journey is quite different.
Yeah, well, the plan was to take it for a couple of weeks. And 20
How many
years
years?
later, 20 years later, I was still taking it. So I had planned loads of times to come off it, but I suppose I wasn't given the support, I wasn't given the map, I wasn't given the option that this is what you have to do to come off it, and this is what you have to do to stay off it. Because coming off it is not really the hard part. It's learning to stay off it. It's learning how to live without it. It's learning how to be a brother, a son, going through normal everyday life without it, without some sort of substance in our body. That was the hard thing for me, and it still does be on a daily basis. So we still have to stay connected, and I still have to stay at a very basic level of my recovery at all times, because I can sometimes forget that and think that we don't need to do A, B, C anymore, and before I know it, I'm isolated again, and my head is down a number on me again.
It is, Nicola, I think, something you described about, it's about having a care plan, but it's also about having the support to sustain your care plan, and perhaps maybe that's why some stay on it longer than than we can maybe understand. 15 years, 20 years, but unless you've walked in those shoes.
Yeah, a lot I've heard this from a lot of people in my own experience. They go into treatment and they think their life's going to be wonderful. They come after it. It's only about the drugs. It's about living. How do you live? How do you meet the life? The terms and life throws at you. I probably do as much now as I did. I'm 20 years in recovery. I implemented a 12-step program. That's on a daily basis. When I don't implement that, I go off tilt. My thinking goes off tilt. My emotions might go off tilt. So that works for me. It might not work for everyone. Usually what it kind of takes is you go through therapy and counselling, and then you realise, okay, this is a lifelong thing. This is not like, I can never use drugs safely again, or alcohol. So how do I stay away? And I have a home group, I save that group, that's a huge part. Now it's like giving back.
Yeah.
Very important. And to find a purpose, that's the thing. If you're going to take something as huge as drugs away out of your life, you've got to replace it with something that's worth something to you,
Mick, just those kind of last questions, just before we wrap up, really spoke, I suppose, maybe to the challenge, not just for the Assembly, but for society at large. Resources aren't unlimited. Choices have to be made, and when you look at that kind of the allocation of resources and how you resolve something like this, you know, so it's, you know, I think the last speaker was kind of speaking, is it a trade-off? Is it, you know, at a time when everybody's struggling maybe to find housing? What are maybe for you and for Jo-Hanna, maybe looking at this from a bigger perspective, are the best sort of policy responses in a situation where we don't have unlimited resources?
Well, I think just because the problem is complex doesn't mean that it can't be tackled effectively. And I think we have the drug services are kind of the Cinderella services. So there does need to be a change in our view of this dilemma. There does need to be a higher priority placed on tackling problems related to substance misuse. Hopefully that's why we've decided to have a citizens' assembly about this, so that we can get 100 people clearly thinking about the extent of the problem, meeting a lot of the people in the field who are doing very good work. So the people are in place, but the prioritization of it is not in place. There needs to, the whole thing needs to be established on a proper footing as a health problem, and just like we've been capable of responding to cancer as a health problem. And then the number of people in prison, like how many of them really need to be in prison for drug-related offences in the first place? So there needs to be a shift in our whole understanding of this field of drug and alcohol services, and the thing needs to be established on a proper footing. That hasn't happened in this country to date. Hopefully this is an opportunity for the thing to be properly established going forward.
And then, Jo-Hanna, I think it was Harry Kennedy, the former director of the Centre of Mental Hospital, once referred to our prisons as kind of the A&E wings, the mental health A&E wings of society, where a lot of things end up in our prison system that are essentially coming from what are health problems. But sometimes, Jo-Hanna, there can be, I think, a frustration with drug use and how we react to it, and in part reflects the challenge and complexity of someone's drug journey in any event. So when it comes to that, what is actually the best way to respond at a policy and a service level, and not just to kind of throw our hands up and just go, God, it's really complicated, there's nothing we can do. What do you think are going to be the game-changing things in terms of what, just to bring it all to a conclusion, that everybody getting that recovery capital?
Well, I think it is about a cross-sectoral response. It is about building recovery into all policies so that we can, and I get that we don't have finite funds, but it will come back to prioritisation. When we prioritise things, we get things done. It is about speculate to accumulate. It will cost money, but in the medium and long term, that will be turned around. When we're looking at prisons, I mean, prisons become this micro system for recovery, believe it or not, because people have a house, you know, unfortunately. They are connected with community. They have peers that can bring them along. So again, if we look at that therapeutic model of a peer-driven support, prison is somewhere that we could really do a lot of work. Yes, there are people there that shouldn't be in prison, but there's also people there that will be there for a long time that deserve access to recovery services, treatment services. So again, it's about switching the lens towards this recovery space. It's not, yes, I agree with Mick, it is a health issue to a point, but it's about health leading on what the other sectors have to do. We need to stop, just to conclude with what's not working. What's not working is a health system delivering on education, housing, training. Business they don't necessarily have a remit in, and they certainly don't have a budget for. So that's what's not working.
Brilliant, just getting all that totality. It is coming up to 10:15, so just want to thank all of the panel, because I think it's really, I think we're really getting to the difficult issues. It's one thing to articulate the problem, another thing to really try and see what the solutions might be. But for their personal insights and for all of the expertise they've brought as a result of their experience, please say thank you to Jan, to Daniel, to Mick, to Nicola and to Noel. Thank you, and I'll hand back.
Thanks. Thank you, Darrell, and thanks to our panellists again for opening up so well to us all and informing us. I was struck by a few things just before I hand it back across to yourselves at the table. I think the one point that jumped out at me in that discussion was particularly the issue of recovery. It's not just a phase, it's actually a life cycle and a continued life cycle. So sometimes we think of it as you go into recovery and you come out of recovery, but it certainly struck me as it's for life, and the supports that we need to put around people are not just for a certain phase. So thanks for that. The other point that Mick just highlighted at the end is, again, what came through yesterday about this being a really high priority for society, being a real high priority for policymakers, being a higher priority for government comes through in every discussion we've had all weekend, and it came through very strong again there in that panel discussion. And I think, as Jo-Hanna has been consistently saying to us, a kind of whole of society response, a whole of government response, a whole of state agencies response to this issue, and up and until we get that landed, that real key point that this is not just about areas of high social deprivation because they suffer the most, that's a fact. But unless and until we put our arms around all of government supports, all of state agencies, all of society around this issue, people will continue to be marginalised, stigmatised and suffer. So I really want to thank the panel for their insights into that. So thanks Derval again, and we will be back with Derval at the next discussion as well, and thanks to our panellists. Yeah.